Hello everybody and welcome to New Music Friday. This is December 17th, 2021, and this is the show where I give you guys the latest prog headlines. I'm Nathan on Shuffle and I'm excited to be here with you guys. This is kind of a special show where I'm not talking about the weekly news like usual, but I'm talking about the year in review basically, because this is going to be the last show of the year and I wanted to kind of go back through some of the old shows and talk about what I thought were the 5 biggest headlines of the year and kind of recap and review what I've talked about throughout New Music Friday, basically, which only started, I believe, in June. So really, this show started halfway through the year, so it doesn't really capture the first half of the year. Just keep that in mind as I go through some things. But I felt like this had to be the last show because next Friday is Christmas Eve, which me and my wife are going out of town for, and then the week after that it's New Year's Eve, and then the week after that is my wife's birthday weekend. So we have plans around all of those things, and there's just no way I could really squeeze in a show. And I figured kind of around the end of the year, beginning of the year, there might not be as much news to cover anyways. Of course, that was kind of blown out of the water this week. I felt like there was a lot of interesting things happening this week. Just as kind of a quick hit, since there's a few things I definitely would have talked about if this was a more traditional episode. So I'll give you these quick hits first before I delve into the main subject matter. First, I didn't quite get to it last week, but Flower Kings by Royal Decree pre-orders started, so they have a new album coming out in March next year, and they released a new single called The Great Pretender, which is a great look into the sound of the band and what you might expect from the album. So definitely check out The Great Pretender, a great single. I did link it in the description of a previous video, but I'll link it in this one too. Also, I saw that Pattern Seeking Animals is coming out with a new album called Only Passing Through. So they announced that. That's going to be coming out on April 1st. Of course, Pattern Seeking Animals, this is their 3rd album. I loved their last album, Prehensile Tales. They are comprised of many members of Spock's Beard. John Bochhold is kind of the main guy who wrote a lot of Spock's Beard songs in the post-Neil era. Of course, it also contains Ted Leonard, who sings with Spock's Beard now, Jimmy Keegan, who's drummed with Spock's Beard in the past, and then Dave Maros, who of course is the longtime bass player for Spock's Beard. So definitely one to look forward to. Star One, Arjen Anthony Lucason's big project. Pre-orders started today, so you can order the new album plus a new single called Prescient that features Ross, Jennings, and Michael Mills on vocals. Came out as well today. Really fantastic proggy track. I definitely recommend it. Not only are there pre-orders for the new album coming up, Revel In Time, but also for the previous Star One albums. They're being re-released on vinyl as well. So those are Space Metal and Victims of the Modern Age. So those are available for pre-order on vinyl, and of course the Revel In Time, there's multiple, not just vinyl, but different CD packages and different things going on with those. And then I saw Jonas Lindberg and The Other Side, kind of a newer symphonic prog act, kind of similar to like Flower Kings and Spock's Beard, recently announced they're signing with Inside Out and released their first single today from a track called Oceans of Time. So really fantastic prog. I'll definitely put the link to it down in the description. Fantastic work. And then finally, I thought it was interesting, Magenta have a new song out called Too Many Voices from an upcoming EP, Songs from the Big Room, which I believe it may have already be released or being released shortly. This EP was funded by Magenta fan Andy Goodall, who passed away in 2020, so it's kind of dedicated to his memory. So that's kind of the 5 items I would have covered if this was a traditional show. So you kind of get a little bonus New Music Friday. Just wanted to quickly touch on those at the head of the show before I get into the top 5 of New Music Friday for the year. So these are kind of big items that kind of encapsulate several different things you'll see as we go through. And I just wanted to kind of note the different items that I covered in these different categories, essentially. Just kind of highlight some of the shows that I've done, essentially. So number 1 on the list today of my top 5 of New Music Friday 2021 is touring news. for 2022, especially as COVID restrictions are starting to ease a bit. And, this is always still in flux. There could still be COVID restrictions that rise back up. There could be. So there's little bit of a question mark on some of these tour dates and things that are upcoming. But I wanted to mention just kind of a smattering of the different news that I've mentioned for different tours upcoming. Marillion Weekends are coming in 2022. That was talked about on my third episode on June 24th. On July 2nd, I talked about the Haken Invasion Tour in 2022 that's coming to Europe. And then I talked about transatlantic tour dates in 2022 in my 9th episode on August 13th. So the Pineapple Thief also is doing a tour. I believe that was taking place this year. I announced that on August 27th. There was tour news from Frost, Opeth, and Mastodon, Big Train, Spocksbeard. I did a whole bunch of tour news from many bands on September 17th. I talked about Dream Theater postponing their tour into 2022 on October 1st. I talked about Morsefest, which is coming up, and the Lightsabers program, which was a funding opportunity for the Marillion weekend shows and their different tour that they're planning. That was on October 8th. And then the Symphony X Haken co-headlining tour and Nightwish North American leg of the tour on October 15th. And then touring news from Dream Theater, Leprous, and Deer Hunter. So just a bunch of different touring news that I talked about throughout the year that I wanted to mention. So as far as I know, most of these are going through and they're planning on it. I know me personally, I have tickets to several different things upcoming in 2022 that I'm hoping will hold. I had tickets to Neil Morse Band that unfortunately got postponed to next year, but hopefully that'll take place in Seattle in February. They're doing a lot of tour dates. They kind of added a couple new dates as well recently. One even here in LA, which is kind of funny because my parents bought the tickets to Seattle thinking that was going to be the closest we're going to be able to get. And then they do an announcement recently of a date in LA. So, but we already have tickets and travel plans arranged for the Seattle trip. So we're probably going to stick with that, even though we could have gone to LA for much cheaper and an easier trip. But, that's kind of how it goes with these things. So I just wanted to mention that as the first big item because I talked a lot about tours and things, and I talked about my own anxieties with tours, and sometimes I get anxious about going to concerts because of the environment and, different logistics about it and what kind of crowd will be there. But I know it's such a exciting piece of news for you guys, so I definitely always like to highlight when there's touring news out there. The second item that I wanted to mention in our big kind of roundup here is the saga of Big Train is kind of how I talk about it here. Throughout my time on New Music Friday, I talked about Big Train very often. They were on several different shows with several different bits of news. It started out with a solo reaction to their single Apollo back early in June 11th on my very first show, where I kind of incorporated some music reactions into the show. So that was kind of leading up to their new album coming out. I talked about an interview with Greg Sponton about their new album on June 17th. I talked about how Big Train entered the UK charts at number 31 with their latest album, Common Ground. So that was really exciting news for the band. That happened August 13th. I talked a bit about the documentary of Journey of the Passengers, which kind of is a Big Train themed documentary mostly about the fans of Big Train and people that follow them on their tour and so forth. So I thought that was an exciting release. It was released in segments on YouTube. So that was cool. There was touring news that they came out with. They were going to tour in the UK in September 17th. And then they announced another new album, Welcome to the Planet, that was going to come out January 2022, which is still scheduled. That news came out on October 22nd in my 19th episode. So that's still scheduled and planned to happen. But of course, tragedy struck the band, and David Lungden, their frontman, songwriter, lead vocalist, multi-instrumentalist, David Lungden passed away, unfortunately, which I announced on my show November 26th. And so that was a bit of a somber episode because of the gravity of that news and how it was so shocking, and it kind of upended a lot of things that the momentum that the band had up to that point and all of this news leading up to it. Of course, nothing quite matches the severity and seriousness of that happening this year. So it's tough to talk about in the same breath as some of these other achievements by the band. And of course, it means that, you know, things are a little uncertain about the future of the band. Of course, it's not the right time to speculate on that, but they did announce that they're canceling their tour dates for this upcoming UK tour, and they're not going forward with their plans. They were planning a North American tour, but that's been canceled. Those plans are not going to be going through. So, and the band will probably announce a statement later in 2022 about what they're going to do as a band moving forward. So we'll have to wait till that point, but there's still a lot of mourning and still a lot of people, you know, really affected by the loss of David Lungden. So definitely still in that period of grief and mourning and shock over that event. So that was Big Train and kind of their history throughout the year. They had a big year in, you know, both good ways, but also in bad ways. And so just wanted to document that. I felt like it was such an important staple of New Music Friday this year. It had to have its own segment here. And then at number 3, I thought I would put in album releases from legacy prog acts. You know, I thought it was cool that several legacy prog bands that, you know, were of course big names in the 70s, they came out with some albums, or are coming out with some albums. I, of course, talked about Styx, Crash of the Crown, was released way back in June 17th. Yes, I talked about the upcoming at that point. It's been out now for a while. I talked about The Quest from Yes and how that was coming out. I talked about it on July 9th, the announcement of the album, and then about the release of the album on October 1st. Then Jethro Tull announced their upcoming album, The Zealot Gene. That announcement came out on July 16th. On my 6th episode of the show. So that is an exciting one for a classic prog band. Talked about Caravan and their album It's None of Your Business, which has been released at this point. And I talked about PFM as well. I Dreamed of Electric Sheep, both albums that have been released this year. Those were talked about in August and September, respectively. So I just thought it's really cool that these bands, instead of just retiring and resting on their laurels, in a sense, they actually continue to make new music and had some incredible releases, both ones that have happened and then one that's upcoming with the Zealot Gene, which I'm excited to get into next year. So some really cool news there from the different legacy prog acts that I thought was worth highlighting. And so definitely an important item on my list. Number 4, kind of giving it its own spot here, is the Genesis Last Domino Tour. I thought was a big event in Prague this year, deserving of its own placement. I talked about it quite a bit through the show. I talked about the big 4 LP set that came out in anticipation, that basically a big greatest hits set that probably for most Genesis fans, they already have all that material and don't need a greatest hits collection. But I talked about that. I talked about the Last Domino PBS documentary that kind of highlighted the preparation and planning for the Last Domino tour. Talked about that on September 10th. Then the kickoff of the Last Domino UK tour, you know, on September 24th, I talked about how it was starting up and people were excited about it and kind of the early impressions of how it went. People really enjoyed the tour. I think it was a really good success. Of course, the last piece of news about it is the last 4 dates were postponed due to COVID. So that was unfortunate, but the shows that they did have were really well received. I saw a lot of good commentary. Of course, Phil Collins has talked about this probably is the last time you'll see Genesis in this form. His health is not as great as it has been. You know, he does a lot of these shows kind of seated on stage, doesn't move much because of, you know, his health at this time. But he's still, you know, such a great presence and has such a great personality, great frontman, and has a lot of great moments that I've seen. You know, of course, I didn't attend this tour, but I have seen many videos of it pop up on YouTube and such, and really have been excited to see that. And as kind of a piece of this, Steve Hackett also toured this year, and he does a lot of classic Genesis material, so it provided 2 great avenues for Genesis material. Of course, Genesis proper kind of doing more of the pop-centric 80s stuff, but a little bit of touchstones of their classic 70s material, and then Steve Hackett just doing mostly that 70s style progressive rock of when he was in the band, of course, and then also incorporating some of his solo material. So really cool ways to get to hear Genesis this year, and I thought that was worthy of mentioning as a big piece of news. And then finally, just kind of a catch-all, this final piece, the number 5 category for the year is big album releases by newer prog bands. There's kind of this new host of newer prog bands that are taking the limelight and are really bringing the genre forward. And some of them also are kind of getting into this like legacy stage where they're feeling like, even though I'm calling them newer prog acts, they've been around for 20 years or so. Because we got the Neil Morse band, Innocence in Danger, and Leprous Aphelion. I talked about those new releases in my very first episode back in June. I talked about Dream Theater, A View from the Top of the World. So Dream Theater released a new album. Of course, they've been around all the way back from like the late 80s, but really cool to see them come out with a really strong new release. Marillion is coming out with a new album early next year, An Hour Before It's Dark, that I talked about. So once again, they've been around, of course, since the 80s, but I feel like they're, kind of part of this newer prog kind of realm. Nick DiVirgilio, Morse, and Jennings are releasing a new album called Troika, which is more of a singer-songwriter type vein, but of course 3 big notable newer prog stars there. Star 1, Revel in Time, which I talked about at the opening of the show. So that's coming out next year. Definitely going to be a cool album based on like sci-fi concepts and sci-fi stories. Porcupine Tree, that was a huge one. They're coming together. That could have been an item all on its own. The Porcupine Tree kind of, I don't know if you'd call it reunion or just coming back together for an album after a long hiatus. So Closure Continuation will be coming out next year. And they released a single, which was really excellent, called Harridan. That was great news that came out November 5th. And then, of course, which I also mentioned at the top of the show, the Flower Kings' new album by Royal Decree, showing that they're still kicking. So really cool. Just a lot of great new albums to anticipate. Some that came out this year, some that are coming out early next year. There's so many albums. There's so much great stuff coming out that, it's great for me and doing this channel that there's always a wealth of albums to talk about and to be excited for. So those are the basic news items I wanted to touch on for the year, just as kind of a roundup for the year and what we've done here. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this show. I think many people have told me this is one of their favorite segments, of at least of my solo shows. I know Jana Reacts gets a lot of attention. Those are the videos that get viewed the most on this channel. But when it comes to my solo content about new music, this is kind of what a lot of people gravitate towards, and I hope it's kind of a good roundup of some of the big news that might interest you if you're a prog fan and like the sort of bands that I like. And I try to focus as much on as many things as I can here, but I know I probably have tunnel vision for certain bands, but that's just kind of how it works. It's hard not to have that for the bands that really are important and touch me specifically, but I do try to give a little bit of recognition to lesser known bands at the same time when they do something notable or releasing a new album. I like to mention it too. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed this, and the channel, I really am excited for next year for all the new albums coming out. I'm going to definitely do a lot of album reviews. I plan to do a lot of the new music shuffle type shows where I talk about several albums at one time that are really grabbing me and that are recommendations, and plan to just continue forward with Jana Reacts and all of that stuff. So there's a few shows sprinkled for the rest of the year, some year-end content. I'm doing a big top 16 albums show towards the end of the year. Next week, I'm hoping to release a kind of an extra show about my favorite songs of the year that I think should be really interesting. And then me and Jana have a kind of a special Christmas episode coming up soon that I want to tease and mention. So next week should be pretty fun with those 2 videos coming out. And next year should be a great one too. And I plan to continue these shows. Like I said, it's on a little bit of a hiatus, but we'll come back mid-January for sure. And hopefully there'll be some cool news. Maybe that'll be a kind of a big show where I can kind of catch up on some of the news that happened throughout the next few weeks, if there is anything. So I hope you guys are enjoying the show, and hopefully you guys will be excited for all the news to come. And I just kind of want this to be a one-stop shop for all prog stuff. If you just want a quick show that kind of gets you in the know about what's upcoming and what's happening, that's kind of the purpose here. So hopefully that was realized this year and you guys enjoyed the shows. So thank you guys so much. You are all great. I love the support this year. I never expected to have as much support as I've gotten. You know, when I started this channel I think it was in April this year, I thought it was just a side hobby, you know, maybe a couple people would see it, but really it was more for me and just a way to express the way I feel about music in a way that I can't really talk to many people around me very much because they don't share the same passion for this music that I have. So I'm reaching out to people out there, you guys who watch this, because you guys have the passion I have, and it's fun to talk to you guys about it. It's fun to interact in the comments. It's fun to see people come on board and become regulars and comment on a lot of videos, and I feel like I've developed some friendships through this, and it's really been an incredible year for me, and I hope to just continue to grow it. So please continue watching, continue viewing, continue commenting, all the things you guys are already doing. Subscribe if you haven't yet. That would really help me out. The more my subscribers climb, the more motivated I am to come out with more stuff and to really be there for you guys in delivering the news and giving you recommendations for new music. So thank you guys once again. You guys are really amazing out there, and I really appreciate the support. So hopefully you guys have a great rest of the year, and I'll see you guys in 2022. So thank you guys, and I'll see you later. Bye.